Hey there, Algebra 2 kiddos. Alright guys, what you guys are going to be tested on tomorrow includes everything on this review sheet, plus you're going to have radicals and rationals from the first two quizzes that are also fair game, so keep that in mind. Alright, on this review sheet, we're going to talk about how do you use the most efficient way to factor. Do you complete the square? Do you do quadratic formula? When does each method make sense? Just as a caveat though, if you get stuck, the quadratic formula will work every single time, no matter what problem it is. It will work for all of them. Even if it's imaginary, even if it's square roots, even if it doesn't simplify, quadratic formula will work every time. So just keep that in the back of your head. Alright, on number 1, whenever you guys see an x squared and there's no x term, you always want to just do solve by square roots. It will always be the fastest. So if there's no x by itself, you just solve by square roots. So we're going to add 64 and then take the square root of both sides. Just make sure you guys remember, whenever you take the square root, it's two answers, both positive and negative. All right, that one was super easy. All right, let's take a look at this next one. So we do have an x, so I can't solve by taking the square root. But now I want to think about factoring, especially because my a value is just 1. And when the a value is just 1, factoring can be pretty quick. So if I do this, I'm thinking about the x game. I'm thinking about what gives me negative 16 that has a difference of negative 6. Now when you guys are doing this, it may be helpful to do just a quick t-chart off to the side. So what's going to give you negative 16? So we've got 1 and 16, 2 and 8, aha. 2 and 8 have a difference of negative 6. Which sign has to be negative? That might depend. So for me, the 8 would have to be negative and the 2 would have to be positive in order for us to get negative 6. So negative 8 and 2. So I'm going to write x minus 8, x plus 2. And then real quick, what we want to do is FOIL this in our head to make sure that these factors would distribute to give me this quadratic, and it does. To solve when I have two parentheses equal to 0, technically what we're doing, guys, is taking each parenthesis and solving for x separately. So that's how I get x is 8 and x is negative 2. The shortcut way to make this work is if I have positive, negative inside the parentheses, my answer is always the opposite of that sign. All right, on number 3, when the constant is already over, it looks like completing the square. So you can definitely work it out with completing the square. If you like factoring, we could always move the 40 back over and then think about what times what gives us 40 that has a difference of 3. Completing the square may be a few extra steps for this particular problem, but we're going to go ahead and solve it that way just in case, just so you guys can see what we would do. All right, so to be clear, we did solve by square roots, solve by factoring, and now I'm doing another factoring, but we're going to use this one as completing the square. So since the constant's already over, our next job is to do b divided by 2, and that becomes our factor. Then we go back up to this 3 divided by 2, and we have to square it. So then I get 9/4. So that 9/4, that's going to be added to 40. Now this is where you want to get your calculator. Unless you want to work this out in your head, be my guest. Alright, so with the calculator, I'm going to go ahead and plug in 40 plus. And make sure when you do parentheses, y'all, that that fraction is in parentheses. So I've got 40 plus 9/4, but I want to make sure that the calculator leaves it as a fraction if need be. So I'm going to hit the button that says math, and then the very first option says frac, so I'm just going to hit enter. Enter one more time, and I get 169 over 4. This is a good sign because it means I have two perfect squares, 169 and 4. To get rid of a square, we square root. So I'm going to get x plus 3/2 equals plus and minus. Now the square root of 169 is 13, and the square root of 4 is 2. So now that I've got the square root of 169 over 4 simplified, we're just going to go ahead and subtract the 3 halves to both. So what this ends up giving me is 13 halves minus 3 halves, which is 10 halves, and 10 divided by 2 gives us 5. So there's one answer. The second thing is negative 13 halves minus 3 halves, which gives me negative 16 halves, which gives me negative 8. So that's my second answer. All right, on number 4, you could use this by completing the square. Just don't forget you'd have to divide by 2 first. So what I'm going to do is solve this by factoring, but when a is greater than 1. So when we do this, we're going to take 3 terms and turn it into 4 terms. So I'm going to do the x game with a times c on the top and b on the bottom. So I've got 2 on the top and 3 on the bottom. So 2 times 1 would give me 2. That would multiply to give me, or add, sorry, to give me 3. Now because a is 1, I can't just say x plus 2 times x plus 1. Because when I FOIL that, I won't get the original equation. When a is 1, we can do that, but when a is not 1, I have to do something else. So this is where we're going to turn 3 terms into 4 terms. So I'm going to make sure I put that 2 along with the x because we're replacing 3x here, and then also 1x. And then we're going to drop down the 1 and the equals 0. So now that I have 4 terms, now we're going to do grouping. So we're going to do the first 2 terms, the last 2 terms. And now I'm looking inside the groups. So here I can take out a 2x, and we're left with x plus 1. Now when I can't take out a number and I can't take out an x, this is where we take out either a positive 1 or a negative 1. Because the third term is positive, we're going to pull out a positive 1. And we know we've done this right because now we're left with identical twins inside those parentheses. So the last step is to write the twins one time and to put the greatest common factors in their own parentheses so that 2x and the 1 get their own parentheses, still equal to 0. So now we're going to do opposite of the back divided by the front to help us solve a 2-step equation. So the opposite of 1 is negative 1, so that's one of our answers. When you have 2 numbers in your parentheses, it's always opposite of the back term, so negative 1 divided by the front coefficient, 2. So the second answer is negative 1/2. All right, this is a quick synopsis of solving my square roots, solving my factoring when a is 1, completing the square with fractions, and then factor by grouping when we take 3 terms and turn it into 4.